Gerhardt Konig lived the kind of life people described as steady, responsible, and quietly admirable. The kind of life that doesn't make headlines until something terrible happens. And that irony would become the most painful part of his story, because he had no idea he was walking straight toward a storm that someone else was brewing in silence. Born into a hardworking Midwest family, Gerhardt grew up learning that kindness wasn't weakness, that reliability was a virtue, and that humility mattered more than image. He wasn't the guy who tried to impress everyone. He was the guy who asked if you needed help carrying groceries, or who fixed a neighbor's fence without ever mentioning it again. His life felt calm, balanced, and meaningful. Not perfect, but deeply fulfilling in a way many people envy but rarely achieve. He had a stable job at a financial office, the type where paperwork piled endlessly, but he managed it with the kind of patience only organized minds possess. His coworkers admired him, not because he was flashy or charming, but because he was consistent. He showed up early, left late, and made people feel safe simply by being dependable. Outside of work, he had built something even more precious, a loving relationship with a woman he believed he would spend the rest of his life with. Their connection wasn't dramatic or wild, it was grounded, healthy, and honest. They were planning their wedding, saving money carefully, choosing colors, arguing playfully about centerpieces, and imagining a quiet future. Kids, a small house, weekend trips, stability. It was everything he ever wanted. But while Gerhardt saw the world through a lens of simplicity and hope, someone else looked at his life with bitterness so sharp it poisoned every part of his mind. That person was his fiancée's ex-boyfriend, someone who had never accepted the breakup, someone who believed he still had a right to her life, someone whose jealousy had been simmering for months, and someone who despised Gerhardt without Gerhardt ever having met him. The ex-boyfriend wasn't just heartbroken, he was obsessed. That kind of obsession grows slowly, feeding on memories, feeding on resentment, feeding on imagined injustices, until it becomes something unrecognizable. He stalked their social media accounts daily, studying every picture, every caption, every smile they shared, convincing himself that those smiles should have belonged to him. When he saw engagement photos, he didn't just feel sad, he felt humiliated, enraged, replaced. He spiraled into arguments with himself, muttering that Gerhardt had stolen the life he deserved, stolen the woman he still believed he owned, stolen the future he had fantasized about. But here's the chilling truth. The ex-boyfriend never expressed this obsession openly enough for people to realize how dangerous he had become. He acted polite in public, he functioned at work, and smiled when needed. Meanwhile, a much darker version of himself flourished in private, fueled by delusion and jealousy. His mind twisted harmless memories into betrayals, and harmless events into personal attacks. And the more he watched Gerhardt live happily, the deeper his hatred sank. Yet through all of this, Gerhardt remained completely unaware. He didn't know he was being watched. He didn't know someone was memorizing his routines. He didn't know a man he'd never harmed believed he deserved revenge. Gerhardt wasn't naive. He was just kind, and kind people rarely imagine the kind of evil that can hide behind a smile. Weeks before the tragedy, the ex-boyfriend intensified his desperate attempts to pull his former lover back into his orbit. He sent late-night messages, long emotional rants, angry voicemails, manipulative apologies, and wild accusations. "You're making a mistake. You owe me another chance. You can't just erase our history. He's not better than me." These weren't random bursts of emotion. They were warning signs of a mind unraveling. She tried to distance herself, tried to maintain boundaries, tried to remain civil to avoid escalating him. But sometimes civility becomes an invitation for obsession to grow bolder. He took every ignored message as rejection, every rejection as humiliation, and every humiliation as justification for revenge. Meanwhile, Gerhardt continued living his life peacefully. He spent weekends with his fiancée picking wedding venues, visiting family, and imagining a future filled with children and slow Sunday mornings. He had no idea there was another future waiting for him, one he would never escape. The ex-boyfriend's thoughts grew darker, heavier, more violent. He began convincing himself that the only way to stop his pain was to remove the man he believed caused it. He stalked Gerhardt's workplace. He followed him home from the gym. He waited outside stores. He memorized patterns, studying him like a hunter studies prey. And the more he watched, the more enraged he became, because every detail of Gerhardt's life reminded him of everything he had lost, and that hatred grew until it overflowed. The turning point happened one night when the ex-boyfriend saw Gerhardt and his fiancée laughing in a grocery store parking lot. To any normal person, it was just a couple enjoying a quiet moment. But to a mind twisted by obsession, it looked like betrayal, humiliation, and final proof that Gerhardt had taken what he believed was his. That night, he sat in his room, shaking, pacing, growling through clenched teeth while replaying the image of them smiling together. Something broke inside him, something that cannot be unbroken. He made a decision, a final, irreversible decision. Gerhardt's fate was sealed long before he even knew a threat existed. But the most heartbreaking part? Nothing about his kindness, nothing about his values, nothing about his gentle nature could have protected him from a man who had already rewritten reality in his mind. And as the ex-boyfriend sank deeper into his violent fantasy, Gerhardt continued planning his wedding, unaware that each step he took forward brought him closer to an ending he did not deserve. And when the moment finally came, the tragedy wouldn't just take Gerhardt's life. It would destroy the lives of everyone who loved him, leaving behind a wound that would never fully heal. And what makes the story so haunting is how silently evil grew beneath the surface, how quietly jealousy turned into obsession, and how quickly obsession turned into murder. The shadows were already moving toward Gerhardt long before he even looked behind him. The night Gerhardt Konig's life began slipping toward disaster was so ordinary that no one could have guessed how violently it would end. And that's what makes the story so painful. Because while he was savoring the simple comforts of a peaceful life, another man was spiraling deeper into a darkness he no longer recognized. A darkness fueled by obsession, jealousy, and the twisted belief that he had been wronged so deeply that the only cure was revenge. The ex-boyfriend, whose name we'll call Evan for clarity, woke up each day with one thought dominating his mind. She should have been mine. At first, he tried drowning those thoughts in distractions, late-night parties, cheap alcohol, meaningless hookups, long drives with loud music meant to numb the ache. But nothing helped, because the pain he carried wasn't heartbreak anymore. It had evolved into something far more poisonous. His friends began noticing changes in him, subtle at first, then alarming. He started showing up late to work, snapping at coworkers, disappearing for days and isolating himself from the people who once grounded him. More than once, his friends told him he should seek help, but Evan brushed them off with a fake laugh, claiming he was just stressed. When, in truth, he had been spending long nights parked in his car outside Gerhardt's apartment building, staring at the glowing windows with a hatred that churned in his chest like an engine fueled by rage. He studied their routine with disturbing precision. He watched the lights turn off each night. He memorized the order of their weekends. He noticed when Gerhardt left for work earlier than usual. He knew which nights the couple stayed in and cooked dinner together. He knew when they walked their dog. He knew when she left the apartment alone to visit her sister. He knew everything. And that knowledge fed his delusion in the worst possible way. To Evan, this wasn't stalking. This was reclaiming what he believed belonged to him. The more he watched, the more he convinced himself that Gerhardt was the intruder, the thief, the obstacle keeping him from the happiness he believed he deserved. Meanwhile, Gerhardt's world remained warm and steady. His biggest worries were the small things: choosing the right wedding invitations, planning dinner with her family, refilling the car's oil, deciding whether they should adopt another dog. He had no idea that someone was studying his every move, waiting for an opportunity to destroy him. In the days leading up to the tragedy, Evan's mental state deteriorated rapidly. He began muttering to himself as he drove, slamming his fists against the steering wheel, imagining conversations where he confronted Gerhardt, conversations where he took back what he believed he had lost. He started writing long, incoherent messages he never sent, letters filled with rage, tears, apologies, threats, and desperate declarations that he couldn't live without her. These notes would later become evidence, a chilling window into a mind consumed by jealousy and fantasy. One night, Evan followed the couple to a restaurant where they were celebrating a small milestone in their wedding planning. He sat in his car across the parking lot, staring through the windshield as they laughed over a shared dessert, their faces glowing under the restaurant's warm lights. To a normal person, it was sweet. To Evan, it looked like the universe was mocking him. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, and he whispered through clenched teeth, "You stole her from me." In that moment, something in him snapped, and this time it snapped permanently. He stopped thinking about if and started planning when. He watched them leave the restaurant, watched them walk to their car, watched Gerhardt open the door for her with gentle care, and it made him feel physically sick with rage. From that night forward, Evan wasn't just obsessed, he was preparing. He started tracking Gerhardt more intensely. He followed him to work one morning, memorizing which door he used. He followed him to the gym, watching from a distance as Gerhardt wiped sweat from his forehead after a long workout. He followed him to a supply store where Gerhardt bought tools for a home improvement project. Every location, every routine, every detail became fuel for Evan's plan. He convinced himself that the universe wanted him to act. He twisted innocent coincidences into signs. A green light turning just as he reached the intersection meant he was meant to continue following him. A parking space opening near Gerhardt's building meant destiny was rewarding his persistence. This wasn't love anymore, it was obsession masquerading as fate. And at the same time, Gerhardt remained completely unaware. One evening, he sat on the couch with his fiancée watching movie trailers, arguing playfully over what to watch, and when she rested her head on his shoulder, he kissed her forehead with the kind of affection that said he truly believed their future was secure. He didn't know that a pair of eyes watched them from outside the window. Yes, Evan had gotten close enough to their apartment building to see through the blinds. Rain dripped from his hair, but he didn't blink. He watched the silhouettes moving on the couch, watched the soft glow of the TV reflect off their faces, and in a whisper that sounded more like an animal growl than human speech, he said, "That should have been my life." Over the next 2 days, Evan's obsession reached its peak. He stopped sleeping. He barely ate. His world shrunk to a single thought: remove Gerhardt. He researched methods. He searched online for weapons. He read forums about confrontations gone wrong. He even wrote out a detailed step-by-step plan, though in the moment it felt more like journaling than plotting a murder. His mind was a tornado twisting logic into madness. By now, his friends had realized something was seriously off, but Evan avoided them with excuses about work and exhaustion. No one knew he had purchased a knife. No one knew he had started rehearsing how he would approach Gerhardt. No one knew he had been driving past Gerhardt's building at odd hours, waiting for the perfect opportunity. And then came the night that changed everything. A Thursday. Calm, cool air breezing through the trees. Gerhardt left his office later than usual, carrying a bag filled with papers he planned to review before the weekend. He locked the office door, walked through the nearly empty parking lot, and didn't notice the figure leaning against a car 2 rows away. Evan watched him with cold eyes. Not angry, not emotional, just void, the way a predator looks at prey when instinct takes over. Gerhardt got in his car and drove home completely unaware he was being followed. He kept a safe distance, headlights dimmed, heart pounding with a mixture of adrenaline and delusion. As they reached Gerhardt's neighborhood, Evan made a decision. Tonight would be the night. Gerhardt parked his car and walked toward his apartment building with relaxed steps, humming softly, thinking about dinner and the TV show he and his fiancée were binge-watching. He didn't know someone was getting out of a black sedan behind him. He didn't know footsteps followed him up the walkway. He didn't know danger stood just a few feet away. Evan walked faster, breathing harder, gripping the handle of the knife hidden in his jacket pocket. But right as he was about to step forward, Gerhardt turned around, not because he sensed danger, but because he realized he forgot something in the car. That tiny, innocent action startled Evan so badly that he froze. Gerhardt walked past him without a second glance, heading back toward the parking lot. For one stunned moment, they were side by side. Gerhardt offered a polite nod, just a kind stranger acknowledging another human being. That small gesture of kindness made Evan's stomach twist with rage. When Gerhardt passed him, he whispered, "You don't deserve her." Gerhardt paused, confused, but before he could respond, Evan walked away quickly, disappearing between the shadowed cars. The moment passed in seconds, but it changed everything. Gerhardt mentioned it casually to his fiancée later that night. Some guy said something weird in the parking lot. Maybe he was drunk. She didn't think much of it, neither did he. They ordered takeout, curled up on the couch, and watched their show. But Evan sat in his car that night replaying the scene like it was a movie burned into his brain. Gerhardt's polite nod felt like mockery. His calm expression felt like arrogance. His simple presence felt like theft. And Evan interpreted the entire moment as a sign that violence was not only justified, but overdue. He convinced himself that Gerhardt had mocked him. He convinced himself he had been humiliated. In reality, none of that was true, but obsession doesn't need truth to grow. By the next morning, Evan had entered a full psychotic spiral. He didn't care about consequences anymore. He didn't care about jail, didn't care about witnesses, didn't care about anything except eliminating the man he blamed for his suffering. While Gerhardt and his fiancée spent that Friday planning their weekend, Evan was preparing for murder. He cleaned the knife. He rehearsed his approach. He sat in his car outside their apartment building, engine running, waiting for the right moment. And as the sun went down, the stars hidden behind drifting clouds, and the world slipped into quiet darkness, Evan stepped out of the car with a chilling calmness. The kind of calmness that only appears when someone has surrendered fully to the darkness inside them.
The night Gerhardt Konig was murdered didn't begin with violence. It began quietly, with the soft hum of traffic, the glow of apartment windows, and the peaceful rhythm of a couple winding down after a long week, completely unaware that death was already on its way, closing in step by step, with a knife and a mind untethered from reality. Inside the apartment, Gerhardt's fiancée was folding laundry on the couch while he joked about burning dinner again, and they laughed together, totally oblivious to the shadow standing below their window, looking up with eyes filled not with love or longing, but with pure, focused hatred. Evan, the ex-boyfriend turned stalker, stood in the cold air, clutching the knife in his pocket, repeating the same twisted sentence under his breath. It should have been me. It should have been me. As if saying it enough times would turn delusion into truth. His breathing was uneven, but his steps were steady as he circled the building one last time, memorizing the weak points, counting the exterior lights, feeling the adrenaline swell like a monster inside his chest, demanding release. For Gerhardt and his fiancée, it was a normal Friday. They watched part of a sitcom, argued playfully about takeout versus leftovers, eventually choosing leftovers because they wanted to save money for the wedding. She kissed his cheek and went to shower while he stepped outside to take out the trash. Just a normal, harmless chore, never suspecting someone was watching from the shadows. When Gerhardt pushed open the back door of the apartment building and walked down the short concrete steps toward the dumpsters, Evan knew the moment had come. He stepped forward silently, gripping the knife so tightly his knuckles turned bone white. The parking lot was dim, the only sounds were distant cars and the rustling of leaves, and for a few seconds, the world felt frozen, as if time itself was holding its breath. When Gerhardt turned around after tossing the trash bag, he saw a figure moving quickly toward him. But before he could process who it was, before he could defend himself or even raise his hands, Evan lunged with a burst of rage that had been building for months. The blade pierced Gerhardt's side first, a deep, vicious stab that ripped a gasp from his lungs. He stumbled backward, eyes wide with shock, his brain struggling to understand what was happening. Evan didn't hesitate, didn't speak, didn't think. He just kept stabbing, each thrust more frenzied than the last, fueled by jealousy, obsession, and the distorted belief that killing Gerhardt would somehow heal the hollow agony inside him. Gerhardt tried desperately to defend himself, grabbing Evan's wrist, trying to push him away, but Evan was locked in a psychotic rage. Blow after blow, the knife tore into Gerhardt's chest, arms, abdomen, until his strength began to fade and his knees buckled under him. The final moments were heartbreaking, Gerhardt whispering, "Why? What did I do?" Not out of anger, but genuine confusion, because he had never wronged Evan, never harmed him, never even met him until that strange moment in the parking lot. But Evan didn't answer. He just kept stabbing until Gerhardt collapsed on the cold asphalt, his breaths turning into shallow gasps that faded into silence. For a moment, Evan stood over the lifeless body, chest heaving, sweat and rain mixing on his forehead, and in that moment of emptiness, it hit him. Killing Gerhardt didn't make the pain go away, it made it worse. Panic surged through him. He wiped the knife on his sleeve, looked around wildly, and then ran back to his car, hands shaking uncontrollably. He sped off, tires screeching, nearly crashing at the first turn as adrenaline turned into fear. Inside the apartment, Gerhardt's fiancée finished her shower, unaware that the man she loved was bleeding out just yards from their home. She called his name once, twice, then texted him, "Where are you?" No answer. After a few minutes, worry began creeping in. She slipped on shoes, grabbed her phone, and walked down the hallway toward the back steps. The sight she found at the bottom would haunt her for the rest of her life. She froze when she saw the blood first, dark pools spreading across the concrete, and then she saw him, lying there, motionless. Her scream echoed through the entire neighborhood. Her hands trembled as she knelt beside him, begging him to wake up, begging him to breathe, begging him not to leave her like this. Neighbors ran out of their apartments. Someone called 911. A man tried CPR even though the amount of blood made it clear that there was no hope. By the time first responders arrived, Gerhard was gone. The scene was chaotic. Police tape, flashing lights, sobbing neighbors, officers searching the area for the suspect. But through all of it, she sat on the curb in shock, shaking, unable to process the reality that her future had been stolen in minutes. The investigation moved quickly. Detectives noticed signs of a personal attack, rage-driven, intimate, targeted. This wasn't random. This was obsession. They interviewed neighbors, checked security cameras, analyzed tire tracks. The breakthrough came from one overlooked detail. Earlier that week, a neighbor had noticed a black sedan idling near the building at odd hours. Another resident mentioned seeing a man lingering in the parking lot before, pacing near the stairwell. Piece by piece, the puzzle began forming a picture, and that picture pointed directly to Evan. Detectives searched his apartment and found a gold mine of evidence, printed photos of the couple, handwritten notes filled with disturbing fantasies, angry rants about Gerhardt, timelines tracking their routines, and worst of all, the step-by-step plan describing exactly how he wanted to remove the obstacle. Within 48 hours, a warrant was issued for Evan's arrest. But Evan had fled. He drove across state lines, sleeping in motel rooms, panicking whenever a police car passed, replaying the murder in his head over and over until it felt unreal, like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. But guilt always catches up. 1 week later, he walked into a quiet roadside diner at dawn, exhausted, dirty, disconnected from reality. The waitress noticed his trembling hands. A truck driver noticed the blood on his shoes. And when a news report about the murder came on the TV mounted above the counter, showing Gerhardt's smiling face, the grieving fiancée, and Evan's own name, everyone in the diner stared at him. Evan stood up, stumbled backward, and sprinted out the door, but it was too late. Someone had already called the police. He was arrested less than an hour later, hiding behind an abandoned gas station, curled up on the ground, whispering to himself, "I didn't mean to do it like that. I didn't mean to do it." But he did. At trial, Evans showed no remorse, only confusion. Psychologists described him as delusional, paranoid, and dangerously obsessive. Prosecutors described him as a calculating murderer, fueled by jealousy. In the end, the jury didn't take long. Guilty. Life in prison. No possibility of parole. When the verdict was announced, Gerhardt's fiancée cried, not out of satisfaction, but because nothing could undo the horror she had witnessed. Nothing could bring back the man she loved. Nothing could erase the image of him lying alone on the cold ground. In the years that followed, she rebuilt slowly, carrying the weight of trauma, but also the memory of a love that had been genuine and beautiful before it was shattered by obsession. Gerhardt's story became a reminder that danger doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the shadows of someone else's broken mind. And as for Evan, he spent the rest of his life behind bars. The same walls every day, the same silence, the same memories replaying like a broken tape, trapped forever in the nightmare he created. Episode 3 ends here, with justice served but lives forever changed. A tragic story born from obsession, delusion, and the violent unraveling of a man who mistook possession for love.